I'd like to extend a welcome to the Canadian War Museum. We're here in the War of 1812 gallery, the location of what was supposed to be the Symposium for 2021. Unfortunately, of course, we're now doing it virtually, and so we're coming to you here from the War of 1812 gallery. Myself, I'm Stephen Jarrett. I'm the Archaeology Project Manager for the Center Block Rehabilitation Project. I'd like to take the opportunity here to talk to you about the Archaeology of Barrack Hill. Barrack Hill, of course, was the name for Parliament Hill prior to the establishment of Parliament, and my work has been done in association with the Center Block Rehabilitation Project. Now, the Center Block Rehabilitation Project is a long-term planning rehabilitation that's been multi-decade strategy to rehabilitate the parliamentary precinct and address the deteriorating state of Canada's 20th century Parliament buildings. In the result of that, of course, extensive excavations have been required to do things like establishing the Parliamentary Welcome Centre and to do all the upgrades required for the building. Now, Barrack Hill, of course, was established in 1827 as part to support the Rideau Canal construction adjacent. And of course, I'd like to establish the history of all this with you to start. So the Rideau Canal is, of course, a very significant waterway canal connection between Ottawa and Kingston, established by the British military. Now, the start of this canal thought was following the American Revolutionary War, which started soon after, the establishment of Canada, the conquering of Canada. In 1773, Lieutenant French was sent to examine the Rideau Passage and determine its viability as a secondary route instead of the St. Lawrence River. During the War of 1812, subsequently, naval control in the Great Lakes was found to be key to communication supply between Montreal and Upper Canada for the control. And fortunately, the Americans did not cut this supply line. Now, in 1815, a plan was found from the American Secretary of War, James Monroe, to cut the communication line through the St. Lawrence, which would have hampered the British military considerably. When Monroe subsequently became president, he also ordered the construction of 2 military roads to the St. Lawrence. These factors, along with ongoing tensions in the United States, drove a strong need for an alternate route to the St. Lawrence that was more secure and inland. And this led, through a period of time, to a lot of struggles over whether or not the canal be built by the government here or the military, and eventually it was ordered by the military with the willingness to pay for it. So Lieutenant Colonel By began the survey in 1826 of the area, establishing temporary headquarters in Wrightstown, modern-day Hull, with a camp at Slay Bay, or what would become Entrance Bay, the start of the canal. At this point, he started the construction of a bridge over the river and several log buildings established in Lower Bytown. In that November, he started to return to Montreal to draft plans for more substantial buildings and have contractors established for those. And he started with commissariat and ordnance buildings, which were in the valley, but also advertised for a stone barrack to accommodate 60 men. Not receiving a satisfactory bid, he redrafted his plans for 3 barrack structures, one intended as a hospital, one as an officer's quarters, and the last attachment for regular soldiers. Unfortunately, in the summer of 1827, 2 companies of Royal Sappers and Miners arrived that he requested, and with 160 men, he required the barracks to house them. At that time, he also established cookhouses, moving the cooking function out of the barracks and providing location for the wives and children of the soldiers, and also ordered the construction of a guardhouse to accommodate the guard and house the first jail in Ottawa. And then a separate hospital was also ordered in that year due to the needs of the barracks accommodating soldiers. So this is the establishment of Barrack Hill, and these are the structures that first established Barrack Hill. So the construction of the canal continued from 1827 to 1831, and the Royal Sappers and Miners were obviously the key individuals in Barrack Hill at that time. So in 1828, though, several of the Sappers and Miners were displaced along the line, consistent with construction's challenges arose. Many of the 15th Company were used at Hogsback when the contractor abandoned the works there, and they continued there until the summer of 1831. In 1829, the entire 7th Company was sent to the Isthmus to supervise the work when the contractors also abandoned that site, and they were there until the end of the construction of the canal in 1831. Upon the construction of the canal in 1831, the Royal Sappers and Miners were disbanded in December of that year. Interesting to note that 35 deserted, 1 was transported, 16 were died, 5 were killed by blasting rock, either in the quarries or the canal, 1 drowned, 71 were discharged to take up land in the region, and 31 returned to England either as invalids or otherwise. So following the construction period on the canal, there was thought to fortify Barrack Hill to defend this end of the canal. Now, with cost overruns in the initial canal construction, they did not implement any of these fortification plans. So instead, we end up with what we call the detachment period. So 1832 to 1843, rotating garrison of regulars were posted at Bytown. So regiments stationed in Canada would detach small groups of soldiers, typically between 20 and 25 soldiers, to be stationed at Bytown for its defense. That was slightly disrupted in 1838 for a militia company, and then only 3 soldiers were there as caretaker force from 1839 to 1842. Following that on, we have, through the evolution of the way that the British were considering the defense of Canada, the establishment of the Royal Canadian Rifles and the implementation of a rifles regiment at Bytown. Now, they stayed from 1843 to 1853 with a rough range of 40 to 80 soldiers on site at a given time. And the Royal Canadian Rifles were a new form of regiment for the British military. Now, most of them were older soldiers, at least 15 years of service, and received double pay over regular soldiers, the thought being they were close to retirement and wouldn't desert. Desertion had been a huge problem with the British military in the early 19th century, losing over 5,000 soldiers in the first part of the year of the century. So these Royal Canadian Rifles were designed to defend these far-flung outposts that were more susceptible to desertion, and the idea being that these soldiers who were paid more, had double allotment of wives that were allowed to have jobs on site, and who also could actually take up work outside of the outpost as well, would not desert and would be a better defensive force for Canada. So from 1854 to 1858, the last kind of period on Barrack Hill prior to Parliament, we get another evolution in the British military's understanding of kind of defending these outposts with enrolled pensioners. So these ones were already pensioners under the age of 45. It's still possible to continue fighting. The idea was to grant them ordnance land close to the outpost they were at and only pay them while they were on duty. This was implemented in Canada in 1851. And by 1852, 600 pensioners were in place in Canada. However, the Ordnance Department, who controlled ordnance lands that were military lands, were an independent Department of State within the imperial government. And they were not keen on the plan to use ordnance lands to settle the pensioners. Most pensioners who came to Canada never received land grants, and these grants were only intended to be 2 acres apiece. Now, success in this scheme of bringing these soldiers over, despite the lack of land for them, meant that the British was able to reduce the number of regular soldiers from 8,000 to 5,000 in Canada between 1847 and 1852. Bytown received its at 1854, and at that time, all regulars west of Kingston had been withdrawn. And then the scheme finished in 1858 when the Canadian government organized its own provincial militia and police forces, and the pensioners had an option to join these forces. Of course, then we have the construction of Parliament starting in December of 1859 and the turning of Parliament Hill from Barrack Hill. So what did we find and why did it survive? So the military complex as we know it is 3 barracks with associated buildings essentially within this, with guardhouse and other things. And Parliament, of course, sits largely on that. Barrack Hill predominantly was north of the facade of Centre Block with a wall across, and this is the area that we're seeking to look at predominantly. Now, the edges of the soil around Parliament Hill meant that large portions of this were gone. A large portion of it was under the modern building. But of course, on the east side of the building, we have a very fortunate situation where the bedrock is much deeper, particularly on the southeast corner of Centre Block. And the soil profile from the north end of Centre Block considers much higher for the bedrock, coming down over 3 meters of fill at the southeast corner of Centre Block. So this situation is what allowed the archaeology to survive. At the time of the construction of the first Centre Block, the post-Centre Block construction landscaping, They wanted a level landscape. And unfortunately, we lose the kind of higher portions of the hill, particularly along the outside edges of the hill, and we gain considerable amount of fill as we come towards the southeast corner. So on the east side of the building, we have the surviving portion of the military complex, including the eastern barrack, its cookhouse, the guardhouse, powder magazine, and associated buildings. So after all this, we can talk specifically about the individual features that we found. The first and most substantial surviving one was the guardhouse, which was also a hospital after the original hospital was turned into an officers' quarters. It was only needed to be a large hospital during the construction of the canal. Post-canal, the smaller military force and lack of labor force that the military were using meant that they did not need a huge hospital. And so the guardhouse was converted to also have the hospital use within it. So we get a plan from 1852 done by Charles Ford, who was the superintendent of the canal at the time. And we have a 38.5 foot by 34 foot, 1.5 story building. The guard room, as they calls it in the plan, and the jail cells are on the ground floor with the hospital ward on the second floor. And the mapping indicates a 7-foot ceiling in the basement, but unfortunately doesn't show what the space was in the basement. Of course, the basement is what the portion of the structure which we recovered. The guardhouse survived 100% intact, with the exception of a portion of the north wall, which was taken out by a original center block ventilation tunnel, and a portion of the extension, which I'll discuss briefly, which was taken out by water line. So within the foundation, there was a 70 centimeters to 1 meter of debris when they knocked the building in. We have a photo from 1861 of the building still standing during the construction of the buildings. And so it was knocked down at some point during the construction of the buildings in on itself largely, and the remainder of the fill pushed around. So this has allowed us the basement surface to survive underneath all this demolition fill, and a lot of the pieces from the walls, bell pulls, tags, other paraphernalia like that on the walls to survive in that demolition fill predominantly. So interesting notable features of this guardhouse is this plan from 1852 shows just the singular structure, and subsequently on mapping we see a small extension coming out of the rear of the building on the south side, and this is established with the plan with the hospital side of the building, with a privy at the very end of the structure as well. So this allowed us to see an interesting extension with obviously a hospital function attached. Also within the structure we see a number of additional walls that are very clearly put in place after at some point as well in the building, enclosing the area underneath the jail cells for one reason or another. Of course, there is a considerable amount of material that was found in this, which will aid in the interpretation of the use of the basement going forward. The eastern barrack would be the next piece, large piece that we found. Unfortunately for this structure, it is at the north end of the hill, and so unfortunately it did not survive with this occupation surface around the building. Just a portion of the foundation survived. The majority of the south wall and the west wall survived. Now the barrack also did not have a basement in place, it had a crawl space. So surfaces inside the building were minimal, but still a considerable amount of material was found within the building. We also have a plan from 1852 by Charles Ford, which shows the structure housing 51 men, which is in line with Colonel By's amounts as well. And this structure does not appear to have changed much through time with the various things. It was the one structure, though, that did survive through the entire period of the hill. The central and west barrack both burned fairly soon after the canal was constructed. And so this was the one occupied barrack for the entire extent of the hill. The other major feature is the cookhouse, now coming down from the barrack. The cookhouse is kind of at the northern extent of the surviving occupation surface on the hill here. And we have one plan of the cookhouse from 1827, the construction plan from By for the area. So it's a very small structure with a hearth feature, and the women and children were supposed to be housed in the second story. Now, a considerable amount of changes to this building was also observed archaeologically. The addition of a new wall on the south side, potentially in association with the hearth feature, as well as a patio, flagstone patio outside the structure on the south side, associated with the south door of the structure. In addition, the building also received a smaller building beside, also with a hearth feature. Unfortunately, no occupation surface was found in this piece either. Other significant features found was the second military well. So water was an incredibly difficult thing to find in Upper Bytown, well elevated from the river. Wells were not did not produce a lot of water in Upper Bytown or Barrack Hill. And so a single well had been located in the south lawn. They had attempted to sink some near the barrack structures at some point. And for the early period, at least in the military, they actually had to send a troop of men multiple times a day to get water from the river. So at some point in the 1840s, a second military well was sunk 7.1 meters deep into the bedrock, close to the guardhouse, with a wood platform above. The powder magazine was also excavated as part of this. Again, unfortunately, it's right on the edge of the hill as well and has lost occupation surface around the structure. And we basically found a foundation cut into the natural soil with minimal mortar associated with it. One of the major finds for interpreting the site is 6 additional Privys found on the site. Now, as all archaeologists know, Privys are a fantastic resource in time, and the nice thing with these ones is we have snapshots of time through time of the site with these Privys. We have 2 early Privys, one of them constructed of stone, likely one that was shown on the initial construction plan from By, but it's very shallow, and so it was likely moved on to a new location. The mid-occupation one that's shown in the 1840s maps up to the early 1850s maps, kind of south of the cookhouse, and then 2 late military ones, both stone, one in the guardhouse and another one that doesn't appear in any of the mapping. So of course, the ongoing analysis of this as we move through the post-excavation work will allow us to provide some very interesting snapshots of the site through time and those different periods of the history of the hill. Of course, through all this, we have the occupation surface basically from the south edge of the cookhouse all the way to the guardhouse over to the establishment of center block, including a number of other features along with the south wall of the military complex, other pits. We found a very large storage pit in the middle of the site with a ring box drain around it, which is subsequently cut by the 2 later Privys as part of the work and leveled off and establishing a new ground surface above. So in summary, Bytown was the headquarters for the construction and ongoing administration of the Rideau Canal. Barrack Hill played a key point in fortification of this end of the canal. Now, it was never established any further fortifications on Barrack Hill. Of course, it was just not close enough to the American border to warrant the extra cost in fortifying it. So of course, we've found hundreds of square meters of intact occupation surface along with all these structures, the south wall of the military complex, and pits and drains to provide us with an excellent resource to understanding the occupation of Barrack Hill through time. As we go through this post-excavation, I look forward to providing you all with way more information on various aspects of the history of this site. Now, of course, there's other aspects of the site that were found during our work, including a stone knife on the site near the cookhouse and a little bit of fill, parliamentary fill above the military layers. And a number of parliamentary finds, which I'll just briefly go over, including the fountain in front of center block on the front lawn that was established in 1875, part of the landscaping plan, the first landscaping plan on the hill, but removed by 1885 as it did not fit in with the original architect's vision of the hill. So we've found that, and there's some wonderful photos here of the fountain with the centennial flame and other features associated with that. Of course, we found a number of features associated with the first center block, including original stairs, original portions of the foundation not within the modern center block footprint, and of course, most interestingly, the Victoria Tower foundation inside the Peace Tower foundation as well. So again, look forward to providing more information with all those features in the future. I'd like to say thanks now to my team and all the people who were established in making this project happen. Archaeology is not a one-man job, and so there was dozens of archaeologists who contributed at various times to this project, along with the construction manager, which provided all the resources, equipment and other things to keep us safe and keep us working, and of course the client, PSPC. Thank you.